Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for waiting for me. It's been a full day. First of all, I want to welcome Tanya and Kevin, who are here providing interpretive services for us, and also thank you all for your continued observation of social distancing in this different format for providing the press and the public with information. And so I was also earlier today tied up on a call with most of my mayoral colleagues from across the country again, and there are still many moving pieces, and this remains a very fluid situation, not just here in Edmonton, but I can assure you all across the country in communities of all sizes. We did have a chance to update each other on what we're each doing in each of our cities and learn more about the federal response and also compare notes on what the different provincial governments are doing. But all of us are increasingly concerned, and this is an even stronger theme today, about protecting our most vulnerable citizens. And we feel that there is an urgent need for injection of resources to support the measures necessary to look after vulnerable people, especially in our big cities where they tend to concentrate in Canada. And we're at various stages of discussing those needs with our provincial government counterparts and our federal government counterparts. So again, there's a very strong unified theme of concern for people either experiencing homelessness or at risk of becoming homeless given the economic circumstances we're dealing with here, and real concern for their welfare and for the public health of that cohort in our population, especially in our largest cities. Now, we were expecting to have a call with the Deputy Prime Minister this afternoon, but the Cabinet meeting has run long, so that's been rescheduled till later today. But we should have a chance to speak to her either later today or at the latest tomorrow. Now, the other piece of information I have for you here today that is new is that the province, of course, having called a public health emergency earlier this afternoon, has led us to take the step of convening a meeting of Council's Emergency Advisory Committee for tomorrow at 10 a.m. And the purpose of that meeting will first and foremost be to update the governors, your city council members, on the implications of the provincial decision, the city's continuing role in supporting the province and the orders that it's issued, which we support, the measures that they've announced, and any additional measures that may be required for the city to consider at this time to support our local efforts. So I want to underscore, it's not a foregone conclusion that the city will need to or that the circumstances warrant the declaration of a state of local emergency. But that option is always available to us, and again, the situation's changing very quickly. So we've determined that the right convening mechanism for us is to get the Council's Emergency Advisory Committee meeting tomorrow. It will be here at City Hall for up to 5 of us who may attend in person, and the rest of Council or potentially all of Council may be able to join that by remote. But that'll be an opportunity for the governors and the public to get some further information as well, the latest information available at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Some of that meeting may be in private, where Council receives some legal advice and some privileged information about these matters before making decisions or just receiving the information, but we'll start the meeting in public and do as much of the work as we can. It may be difficult and perhaps even undesirable for folks to attend the meeting in person, pardon me, and so the meeting will of course be live streamed, and we encourage Edmontonians and others who are interested, including from the media, that you'll be able to attend virtually. Accommodation will be made for the media as well in council chambers, though again observing social distancing the way that you are doing very effectively here today. So we will have lots more to say tomorrow, and I also want to thank City Manager Lachlan and his team for their continued dedicated efforts, as well as introduce Deputy Fire Chief and Head of the Emergency Operations Center, Rob Squire, who's here with us here today. You're going to be seeing more of him now that the city's Emergency Operations Center has been activated in response to the provincial declaration. So happy to take any questions you have. If they're technical, I'll defer to one of these gentlemen, but happy to see you today. So.
agencies, municipalities to deal with at-risk groups. Do you have any information yet on what Edmonton's share of that would be or what you'd like from the province?
I've heard a couple of different numbers. I don't want to make announcements on the province's behalf. I appreciate that they recognized, and this was a theme in my conversation with the Premier earlier this week, that there is an urgent need to support agencies doing work on the front lines, as well as a need for resources for the city to scale up our response, given the requirements of social distancing and isolation, particularly for the homeless population. So whether what's been announced is ultimately what we're going to need remains to be seen, but as a early indicator of willingness to fund those efforts and look after vulnerable people, it's very encouraging. As to the city's share of that, again, I've heard a couple of different numbers, but I think the point is the money's beginning to flow to do that work, and the city takes very seriously the need to provide for the well-being and health of the most vulnerable among us. And so we'll be trusted implementation partners for the orders the province is making today, as well as the implementation of the mitigation measures necessary for people who are looking for a place to go right now.
What's what it means to activate the Emergency Operations Center? What are the differences between that and
I could speculate, but why don't I let the guy who runs the Emergency Operations Center introduce himself to you and orient you a little bit to that. So, Deputy Chief Squire.
Good afternoon. The Emergency Operations Center in the city is a dedicated facility staffed by city employees who are trained in emergency management. The purpose of activating the Emergency Operations Center is to ensure that we are able to operate and deliver services to ensure the safety of our citizens, and that the city can continue to deliver its critical and vital services during this COVID-19 pandemic.
what will that look like?
Could you say more?
Just when since it's activated, what will this look like in the coming days, or how will this be implemented?
Right, so we've activated the Emergency Operations Center at 2:30 p.m. this afternoon. We will bring in staff starting at 2:30 and building throughout the day. We will be taking direction from the Emergency Management Agency. City Manager Adam Laughlin is our Director of the Emergency Management Agency. We take our direction from them, and we will operationalize through there. The main reason, or one of the reasons we activate the Emergency Operations Center, is to speed decision-making and ensure that the folks that we need on the ground doing their job are able to do their job.
Can you give specific examples of any powers that this gives the city?
So I think I would defer back to Adam, City Manager.
So the Emergency Operations Center, in terms of additional powers, it's actually more about integrated and quick decision making within the powers that we currently have. So it consolidates fire, EPS, ADCO, EMS, utility companies, EMS, to be able to make an integrated decision in a quick fashion. In terms of the powers or the delegations, they're still consistent with what we have today. So if there's decisions that need to be made from an emergency perspective, whether it be fire or police, they make those decisions, but what happens is it's very integrated and the communication is streamlined with the activation of the Emergency Operations Center.
When was the last time it was activated?
Off the top of my head, I would say New Year's Eve. We were activated. Typically, we activate between 4 and probably 12 to 14 times a year, depending on need within the city.
How does COVID-19 change things with this activation compared to other situations for the reasons that it was open?
COVID is really one type of an emergency. Within an emergency, really, we find there's common themes or common actions that need to be taken. And that really is around streamlining decision-making, streamlining authorities and roles and responsibilities. So there's a common set of actions that we need to take in any emergency situation.
I would just add that we previously created a COVID task team at the City of Edmonton, and that task team has been excellent in providing advice to the executive leadership team around decisions related to closure of facilities, decisions related to our employees, related to work from home or the encouragement for work from home. So the EOC and the task team work hand in hand. One is externally focused in terms of the operations within the city in an emergency situation or a pandemic situation. The other is around how we continue to manage the organization and provide the critical services within the City of Edmonton. So they're linked and they provide two different streams of service. So there are actions that have been taken, like I mentioned, the closure of the facilities over the weekend and other decisions that we're taking with our employees.
A few years ago, we got a tour for members of City Council of the Emergency Operations Center just to demystify it for us and see what it practically is. And the thing it reminded me of, and most of these centers, and this is something every day people will be able to relate to, it's a bit like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, and the idea is you have all of the different department heads and decision makers all able to share the same information, and then the key decision maker at the center able to make decisions quickly. And so that's where physically it's designed to make sure that all of the information comes in, decision is made, all of the information goes back out. Now that's been happening through City Hall on the administrative decisions that we've had to make so far, but as the situation escalates, it makes sense to have that very rapid decision making and centralized communication facility in place. And then the other thing is that unlike the other times where it gets activated, you turn it on for a night of a big event, or you turn it on for a weekend during an international sporting event or something like this. This will be a little bit different because it's going to have to be activated for the ongoing, and so maintaining the staffing, maintaining the resilience of the people there, ensuring that they're healthy and can continue to do their jobs in the long term is one of the reasons why the city's taken a gradual progression to escalate the things that we've doing rather than shifting gears really quickly, because people need to get people who do this work have needed the last couple days to get their lives in order, and the support from their families who make huge accommodations for first responders and people who do this work in public service. And I'm getting choked up thinking about it, and the mayors were talking about this too, that just such tremendous respect we have for healthcare workers, people on the front lines, our emergency responders who are going out there and still enforcing the law, still putting out fires, still responding to traffic accidents and so on and so forth, not knowing what the health of the person they're going to be helping out is going to be. So it was important for the city to make sure that the folks who are going to be doing this frontline emergency response work, including in the Emergency Operations Center, are in the best possible position to do this work for the long run. Because we're in it for the long haul and we're trying to flatten the curve out for our own staff. That was part of the conversation about our approach to transit earlier today, which we can talk more about if you want, but I think that that's well in hand at this point. So anyway.
With the province declaring a state of emergency, what more, like, if you decide that needs to be done, can you give us some context into what that would mean for Edmonton?
Well, there are still 11 criteria, and Adam's spoken to this previously, that would merit the city needing to consider on a localized basis additional powers beyond what the province has put in place, because there's still further room for us to escalate if necessary. Again, those also come with trade-offs in terms of governance oversight from elected officials and trade-offs in terms of restrictions to civil liberties. So they're steps that we would only take very, very deliberately and on an incremental basis rather than sort of on a preemptive basis. So, but it is one of the things we'll discuss tomorrow, whether we're getting close to, in any one of those 11 sort of initiatory categories, needing to exercise additional powers beyond what the province has already mandated through their public health emergency today.
What else will you be discussing tomorrow?
Well, mainly the city's response, an opportunity for councillors to ask questions of the folks who are doing this work, to provide some oversight and accountability. It's not a decision-making meeting unless we decide the conditions warrant the declaration of a state of local emergency. That's the one thing that committee can do in terms of decision-making, but it has a very important role in terms of keeping the governors and the public, to the extent possible, informed about the decisions that are being made in the public interest in our city.
More resources. Does this mean the Emergency Operations Center mean more emergency responders will be needed at a time where maybe resources are depleting?
Well, I think that's a theme across all public services, from transit to fire to policing, obviously to frontline healthcare, that managers are having to think ahead to how to flatten the curve within their own workforce and where to call in reserves and activate folks who have training who can be brought to bear. So the workforce resiliency in the coming weeks and months of all of our frontline staff, I think, is going to continue to be a key operational consideration for Adam and his team and the task team. I'm not sure that's so much an EOC issue, but they could say more about that. But clearly, we need to be very, very careful about ensuring that we are able to continue to muster out enough police and enough fire and enough bus operators and other frontline folks, and that's why we're trying to take their health as seriously as possible. And I did speak to the Chief of Police earlier today about their contingency plans, and I'm confident in the measures that he and his team are taking. One thing that would be very, very helpful would be a clear and explicit prioritization of testing for frontline emergency responders in particular, so that if they come into contact or there's any risk, and rather than self-isolating for 14 days, if we can get those folks tested and get them back into work sooner, that will help us with the resiliency of our staff complement, especially in our essential services. So priority of testing would be something very, very helpful that we're passing back to the province as feedback from, in this case, our police chief on to manage exactly the risk that you're asking about.
When it comes to the partial restaurant closures of people, is this continuing to receive more prohibitions? What do you expect this to do to the economy here at Edmonton?
Well, this was one of the themes in our discussion with the mayors today, was relief for small business, and it's also feedback we've had from business owners who've been reaching out to us directly here in the city. But across the country, we have the same questions, which small business has, which is, what do I do with payroll? What should I order? Will there be relief? Can you help me with my insurance? And so there are a lot of good questions out there being asked by business. I think we're all looking to the federal government's response this week to shed some light on how employees who are laid off because of these restrictions are going to get expedited EI and other supports, how other supports to business, whether it's tax deferral or direct cash injection, whatever kind of relief might be available to support businesses to be able to continue to pay rent, or else say, to the landlords, you'll be made whole. So those are powers and levers that are way beyond local government's capacity. But I think hearing the consistent call from business to mayors, we're providing that input to provincial and federal government leaders, and I think they're hearing it loud and clear too, because we're kind of all finishing each other's sentences about the need, and now just waiting for those much anticipated federal and provincial relief announcements this week. But the sooner the better, so that people can have confidence that in some cases closing the business or reducing its capacity considerably. From a public health point of view, I think we all have the memo that that's the right thing to do. People are just worried about paying the bills and being fair to their employees. And I think that the sooner relief comes so that people can do the right thing and not worry about the bottom line for the short term here, the better we'll all be from a public health point of view.
Restaurants and pubs can stay open with reduced capacity. Message to businesses and Edmontonians on St. Patrick's Day?
I think this will be a very different St. Patrick's Day than we're used to, and we're really looking to businesses to be very, very responsible stewards of the safety of their patrons and their staff by enforcing those social distancing requirements, which are now provincial legal orders. They're no longer friendly suggestions for public health. They're now firm orders from the government of Alberta. The city will be enforcing those guidelines with our, or those orders, pardon me, not guidelines, with our bylaw staff. But it really does fall to leaders in the business community to self-enforce and send that message, and then also for patrons to be responsible. Now is not a night to get rowdy.
One other thing, this may come up tomorrow, but what progress has been made in trying to find maybe some sites for vulnerable people to isolate who have nowhere else to go?
So the questions around isolation spaces for vulnerable people who don't have a home to self-isolate in, and that's been, I would say, kind of an hourly concern for us since this started to heat up last week. And so we're working with agencies, and then also the city is working to inventory facilities that might be suitable to accommodate the overall population of people requiring housing, either just because they're healthy but still need a safe place to be, and they can't go to the normal places they'd be because either they're being used for isolation or have been closed or operating at reduced capacity. So there is a shift in demand and a need to spread it out over more facilities. How that's actually going to play out in the next little while, again, the provincial government's injection of cash will help us solve that problem without financial constraint. We could still use, quite frankly, a kind of a blank check, quite frankly, to be able to handle this. And so a clear authorization, not just on the social services side, but from Alberta Health Services, that we are treating our vulnerable population and their needs as a public health emergency within itself, as a cohort. I think that would be the most enabling for us to be able to take the steps necessary that we might want to protect people. And that's one of the things, some of the triggers around that are the kinds of things we'll be discussing that, if necessary, could warrant the state of local emergency in order to be able to protect the most vulnerable people and contain and prevent the spread among our vulnerable population. And that's a unique feature, not unique to Edmonton, but certainly we have a large vulnerable population here for various reasons, and working to keep that population as healthy as possible and flatten the curve within that population may require some extraordinary measures. The more help we had and more certainty we had from the province to enable us to do that on a public health basis, the faster we'll be able to act.
Thanks everybody for coming. You'll be seeing quite a bit of this threesome in the coming days. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. See you tomorrow.